The rain began in the late afternoon, a steady drizzle at first, then quickly turning into a storm. The sound of water striking against the windows filled Claire's quiet house, making the evening feel heavier than usual. She had just placed a blanket over her legs and picked up her favorite book when her phone buzzed on the coffee table. The name flashing across the screen made her smile. Was Melissa, her friend from college. Someone she still cared for, even if they only spoke once in a while. Claire answered cheerfully. "Melissa, it's been ages. How are you?" But Melissa's voice carried urgency. "Claire, I hate to ask this of you, but I'm in a bind. My flight back from Chicago has been delayed until tomorrow morning. Could Ethan stay with you tonight? I don't want him to be alone, and you're the only one I trust nearby." For a moment, Claire was taken aback. She hadn't seen Ethan in years. The last memory she had was of a lanky teenager who avoided eye contact and mostly kept to himself. She remembered him as the quiet boy who used to sit in the corner when she visited Melissa's house, playing games on his phone. "Of course," Claire said without hesitation. "Send him over. He'll be fine here." The call ended and she glanced around her cozy living room. It had been a long time since she had hosted anyone overnight. The thought of Ethan staying brought a nervous energy she couldn't explain. Maybe it was simply the idea of having someone in the house after so many quiet evenings spent alone. The doorbell rang not long after. Claire opened it, and for a second, she didn't recognize him. Ethan stood there with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, his hair damp from the rain. He was taller than she remembered, with broader shoulders and a confident posture. His once boyish face had sharpened into defined features, though his eyes still carried that same gentleness she recalled from years ago. "Hi, Claire," he said with an easy smile. His voice had deepened, steady and warm. "Ethan? Oh my, you've grown so much. Come in before you get soaked." She stepped aside. Letting him enter as he placed his bag near the hallway, Claire caught herself staring. She shook it off quickly, telling herself she was only surprised by how much time had passed. He had gone from a shy boy into someone who carried himself like a young man ready to face the world. She guided him into the kitchen. "I just made some tea. Want a cup?" "Sure, thank you," he said, taking a seat at the table. The kettle whistled, filling the silence. Claire poured them both mugs, trying to keep the conversation casual. "So, how have you been? I feel like I've missed years of your life." Ethan laughed softly. "A lot has changed. College has been different but good. Mom probably told you more than I ever would." Claire smiled at his honesty. "She did brag about you getting into the program you wanted." They talked, the conversation flowing more naturally than she expected. She learned about his classes, his part-time job, his passion for photography. He listened attentively when she spoke, asking questions that made her feel like her words mattered. That detail didn't escape her. She couldn't remember the last time someone had looked at her with such focus. As the evening slipped into night, the storm outside grew louder, the wind howling around the house. Claire refilled their cups, noticing the way Ethan's eyes softened when he laughed at her small jokes. There was a warmth in the air, subtle but undeniable. And she wasn't sure if it was from the tea or something else lingering between them after dinner. Ethan offered to help wash the dishes. "It's the least I can do," he insisted, rolling up his sleeves. She chuckled. "Your mother raised you well." They stood side by side at the sink, the clinking of plates blending with the sound of rain. At one point, their hands brushed accidentally, and Claire felt a surprising jolt inside her chest. She quickly pulled back, embarrassed by her reaction, while Ethan pretended not to notice. Later, she showed him to the guest room. The bed was neatly made, and she had placed fresh towels on the chair earlier. "I hope this is comfortable enough," she said, standing by the doorway. "It's perfect. Thank you." His smile was genuine, filled with gratitude. "Good night, then," she whispered, her voice softer than she intended. "Good night, Claire," he replied. She returned to her room, but sleep didn't come easily. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the storm rage outside. Her thoughts drifted to the way Ethan had looked at her across the table. The way his words carried both kindness and a quiet strength. It unsettled her, not in a dangerous way, but in a way that reminded her of feelings she thought she had buried long ago. In the silence of her room, she admitted something to herself. The boy she once knew was gone. In his place was a man who carried both familiarity and mystery. That realization alone made her heart beat a little faster. The clock ticked past midnight, and still she couldn't sleep. Somewhere in the house she heard movement, the creak of floorboards, the sound of someone shifting in the guest room. She closed her eyes, telling herself it was nothing, yet she couldn't shake the strange pull of knowing he was just down the hall. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. Inside, an unspoken tension lingered, fragile but impossible to ignore. And as the storm continued, Claire realized that this night, unexpected as it was, would not be just another evening. Something had already changed, though she couldn't yet name what it was. The storm outside refused to rest. The rain kept striking the roof, and each gust of wind rattled the windows. Claire lay in bed, tossing beneath her blanket, unable to quiet her thoughts. She had hoped that time would ease the restlessness in her chest, but it only grew heavier. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she told herself it was silly. He was only a guest in her house. Melissa's son, nothing more. But her heart betrayed her, replaying every moment of their evening together. His laughter, the warmth in his eyes, the way he listened. She sat up, staring at the faint glow from the hallway light. The night felt endless, filled with a strange energy she couldn't escape. Just as she was about to close her eyes again, she heard the soft creak of floorboards down the hall. Her breath caught. Carefully, she slipped out of bed, wrapping her robe tighter. She stepped into the hallway, her bare feet silent against the floor. Ethan's door was ajar, just enough for her to glimpse the faint light of his phone. He sat on the edge of the bed, hunched forward, scrolling aimlessly, though his face looked distant, as if his thoughts were elsewhere. Claire knocked gently against the doorframe. "Can't sleep?" Ethan looked up, startled for a moment, then relaxed when he saw her. "Not really. This storm's too loud, I guess. Or maybe my mind just won't shut off." She stepped closer, leaning against the doorway. "I know the feeling. Some nights are just heavier than others." He gave a small smile, setting his phone aside. "It's strange. Being here feels peaceful, but it also makes me think too much. Do you ever feel that way?" His question disarmed her. She had expected a simple answer about the weather or college stress, not something that cut deeper. Slowly, she nodded. "Yes, all the time." There was a pause, thick but not uncomfortable. Then he gestured toward the living room. "Would you sit with me for a bit? I don't think sleep is coming anytime soon." She hesitated, but the sincerity in his voice drew her in. Together, they walked quietly down the hall, the storm still roaring outside. In the living room, Claire grabbed a blanket from the couch, draping it across both their laps as they settled side by side. The flicker of candlelight from earlier still lingered, casting the room in a soft glow. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence felt almost sacred, broken only by the rain. Finally, Ethan turned to her, his voice low. I don't really talk to people about deeper things. Most of the time, it's just school, work, surface-level stuff. But tonight feels different. Like I can say things here I can't say anywhere else." Claire felt her chest tighten. "Why do you think that is?" "Maybe because you don't look at me like I'm just some kid figuring life out. You actually listen. It feels rare." His words carried a weight that settled inside her. She searched for something to say, but found herself at a loss. It had been years since someone had spoken to her that way, without expectation or judgment. She felt both vulnerable and strangely alive. "Ethan," she began softly, "you're not a kid. You're thoughtful, and you see things most people overlook. That matters." He studied her carefully, his eyes filled with a seriousness far beyond his age. "You're stronger than you realize, Claire. You've built this whole life, this home, on your own. I can see it. But I also wonder if anyone ever tells you how much you deserve more than just getting by." Her breath caught. She hadn't expected that. The words seemed simple, yet they pierced through her defenses, touching a place she rarely let anyone near. She lowered her gaze, fiddling with the blanket. I'm not sure I know what more even means anymore. Maybe it means not settling, he replied gently. Not hiding what you really want. Not letting life pass while you wait for something to change. The honesty in his voice left her speechless. She wanted to respond, to tell him how those words unsettled her, how they stirred something she had buried years ago. But she stayed quiet, afraid her voice might betray too much. The storm outside raged louder, thunder rolling through the sky, but inside the room it felt like time had slowed. Ethan leaned back against the couch, his shoulders relaxed, though his eyes still held that unwavering focus on her. "Can I tell you something?" he asked. "Of course," she whispered. "When I was younger, I always thought adults had everything figured out. That people your age knew all the answers, had life under control. But sitting here, I realize you're just as human as the rest of us. You're figuring it out too, aren't you?" A laugh escaped her lips, soft and almost sad. "You're wiser than you think, Ethan. Nobody ever really figures it out. We just learn to live with the questions." Their eyes met in the candlelight, and for a heartbeat the world outside disappeared. Claire felt the weight of his words sink into her heart. There was no judgment in his gaze, only understanding. Only the kind of connection that people spend years searching for. She shifted, pulling the blanket closer around herself, suddenly aware of how close they sat. Her pulse quickened, though she tried to steady it. She reminded herself silently. This was Ethan, Melissa's son. She had known him since he was young. Yet the undeniable truth lingered: he wasn't that boy anymore. He was a man, and he had just reached into a corner of her heart she thought was long closed. The clock on the wall ticked softly, reminding her that dawn was still far away. She wanted to speak, to confess how his words had shaken her, but her lips refused. The silence stretched again, not heavy this time, but fragile, filled with something new and dangerous. Ethan finally broke it. "I don't expect you to say anything. I just needed you to know what I see." Claire swallowed hard, her voice barely audible. "You've given me a lot to think about," and that was the truth. She didn't know what the morning would bring, but she knew this night had already shifted something deep within her. Outside, the storm roared, but inside, two hearts sat quietly in its shadow, closer than either had planned, yet held apart by the weight of everything unspoken. The night deepened, and the storm outside showed no signs of easing. A flash of lightning lit up the living room, followed by a crash of thunder that rattled the walls. At that exact moment, the power flickered, then went out completely, leaving the house in sudden silence except for the endless rain. Claire gasped softly. "Oh no, the power's gone." Ethan stood calm, as if he had expected it. "Do you have candles?" "Yes, in the kitchen drawer." She rose quickly, her footsteps guiding her through the dark. He followed with the faint glow of his phone screen, lighting the way. Within minutes, the warm flicker of candlelight filled the house, chasing away the shadows. The glow softened everything, the furniture, the walls, even their faces. The storm felt less harsh now. Though the tension in the air was stronger than ever, they settled back on the couch, the blankets still across them. Claire held her mug of tea, though it had long grown cold. She wasn't thirsty. Her hands just needed something to hold. The silence was different now. With the hum of electricity gone, the quiet felt alive, pulsing between them like something invisible yet undeniable. Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. His voice was steady but low. "Claire, can I be honest about something?" Her heart quickened. Of course. He hesitated, as if weighing whether to continue. Finally, he said, "Tonight doesn't feel like just chance. It feels like I was meant to be here." Her breath caught. She wanted to ask what he meant, but the answer lingered in the air, unspoken. Instead, she looked down at her hands, trying to steady the storm inside her chest. "Ethan, you shouldn't say things like that," she whispered. "Why not?" His eyes searched hers, filled with sincerity. "It's the truth." She rose abruptly, pacing the room, needing distance to breathe. The flicker of candlelight followed her across the walls. "This isn't simple. You're Melissa's son. You're not supposed to be saying these things to me." He stood too. but he didn't move closer. He kept his distance, his voice calm, careful. I know who I am, and I know who you are. I'm not blind to that. But I also know what I feel, and I can't pretend it isn't there. His words hit her like waves. She turned toward the window, watching the rain slide down the glass. Her reflection stared back at her, pale and uncertain. Inside her chest, two voices battled reason, telling her this could never be, and longing, whispering that maybe, just maybe, life had placed him here for a reason. She pressed a hand against the cold glass. You don't understand what you're saying. This can't lead anywhere. I'm not asking for anything, he said softly. I just needed you to know. That's all. Claire turned back toward him. The candlelight carved shadows across his face, highlighting the honesty in his eyes. He wasn't demanding. He wasn't reckless. He was simply sincere. And that sincerity was what frightened her most. She sat down again, her body heavy with emotions she couldn't name. Ethan slowly lowered himself back to the couch, careful not to close the space too much. For a long time, they didn't speak. The storm outside filled the silence with its rhythm, like nature itself was listening. Finally, Claire broke the quiet, her voice trembling. Do you know what you're doing to me? His brows furrowed gently. What do you mean? You're stirring feelings I thought I buried years ago. I've been safe in my little world, living quietly, convincing myself that's enough. And now you sit here telling me things I don't know how to handle? Ethan's expression softened. Not with pity, but with something deeper. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe you deserve to feel again. Her chest tightened, her throat dry. She wanted to argue, to push him away with logic and rules. But her heart betrayed her, beating louder, faster, as if it wanted to agree with him. The storm surged, thunder shaking the room, but neither of them moved. It felt like the entire world had narrowed to this living room, this night. This fragile thread of honesty binding them together. Ethan leaned back, his voice barely above a whisper. Claire, I'll never push you. I just want you to know that someone sees you. Not as Melissa's friend. Not as the woman who lives alone. But as you, and that matters to me. Her eyes filled with tears she hadn't expected. She blinked quickly, turning away so he wouldn't notice. But he did. He didn't say anything, didn't reach for her, didn't try to close the gap. He simply let the silence hold her, giving her space to breathe, to feel, to decide. Minutes stretched like hours. The rain softened slightly, the thunder moving farther away. But the storm inside Claire's heart showed no sign of calming. She looked at him again, truly looked, and realized something had shifted. He wasn't just Melissa's son anymore, not in her eyes. He was a man standing on the edge of something neither of them could define. The candles flickered, their flames trembling, and in that fragile light she whispered, Ethan, what happens now? His answer was simple, steady. Nothing you don't want. That's the only answer. Her breath caught at his restraint. In a world where people often demanded, here was someone who simply waited. That alone pulled her closer, even as she fought to keep her distance. The night lingered, heavy with everything unspoken. No lines were crossed, no rules were broken. Yet the air itself carried a secret neither of them could deny. When at last she rose, pulling the blanket tighter around her, she said softly, we should try to sleep. He nodded, his expression calm, but his eyes alive with things unsaid. Good night, Claire. She managed a small smile. Good night, Ethan. As she walked back down the hallway to her room, her hands trembled. She knew nothing physical had happened, yet something irreversible had. A door had opened inside her, and she didn't know how to close it again. The storm outside faded slowly into silence. But the storm within her heart only grew stronger. The storm had finally passed. By the time the first light of dawn spilled through the curtains, the rain had stopped, leaving the world outside washed clean, the streets glistening beneath the soft glow of morning. Birds began to stir, their songs breaking the silence that had weighed on the house through the long night. Claire awoke to a faint warmth of sunlight across her face. Her body felt heavy, though she knew she had hardly slept. Every time she closed her eyes, her mind replayed Ethan's words, his voice steady, his gaze honest. She could still feel the weight of the moment between them. It's the kind that didn't fade just because the night had ended. She pushed herself out of bed, tying her robe, and headed to the kitchen. The house smelled faintly of rain and candle wax. She filled the coffee maker, listening to the gurgle as it brewed, her hands trembling slightly as she set plates on the table. Preparing breakfast gave her something to focus on, something ordinary to ground her when everything inside felt anything but ordinary. Ethan appeared not long after, his hair slightly messy, his eyes carrying the same sleeplessness she felt. He wore a simple t-shirt, his duffel bag already packed and resting by the hallway. When their eyes met, Claire's chest tightened. "Good morning," he said quietly, as though the house itself demanded gentleness after what it had held through the night. "Morning," she replied, forcing a small smile. "I made coffee. There's toast, eggs. Help yourself." They sat across from each other at the table, the clinking of cutlery far louder than usual in the silence. Neither spoke at first. The sunlight painted golden streaks across the table, and yet between them was a silence heavier than the storm had ever been. Finally, Ethan set down his fork and looked directly at her. His voice was calm but filled with meaning. "Claire, about last night," she cut in quickly, her hands tightening around her coffee cup. "You don't have to explain. I understand. We were both caught in the moment. It was the storm, the late hour. It made everything feel more intense than it really was." But even as she said it, the words rang hollow. She knew it, and so did he. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his eyes steady. "No, it wasn't just the storm. It wasn't just the night. I meant every word I said." Her heart pounded, though she tried to keep her voice steady. "Ethan, you can't." "I can," he said firmly, but not unkindly. "I'm not asking you for anything. I just need you to know that what I felt, what I still feel, isn't some passing thought. It's real." His honesty left her breathless. She stared at him, her throat tight, her mind racing. She wanted to tell him to stop, to remind him of who he was, of the boundaries that existed between them. And yet, deep inside, another part of Hertha, part that had been asleep for far too long, didn't want him to stop at all. She lowered her gaze, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ethan, you don't realize how complicated this is. Your mother is my closest friend. I've known you since you were a boy. If she ever found out—" He nodded slowly. "I know. That's why I told you I don't expect anything. I just couldn't keep quiet. Because sometimes in life you meet someone or realize something that changes you. And pretending otherwise would be worse than the risk of saying it out loud." Claire's eyes stung, though she fought back tears. She looked at him again, and in the soft morning light, he seemed both impossibly young and undeniably mature all at once. She wanted to tell him he was wrong, that his words were reckless. But she couldn't, because a part of her knew he wasn't wrong at all. The sound of her phone buzzing on the counter broke the moment. She rose quickly to answer it, her hands trembling as she picked it up. Melissa's name lit up the screen. Claire's stomach dropped. She answered, her voice steadying with effort. "Melissa, are you home safe?" "Yes," Melissa replied cheerfully, unaware of the storm that had raged inside Claire's house. "Landed a little while ago. I'll come pick Ethan up soon." "Did he behave himself?" Claire's eyes darted toward him, her chest tightening. She forced a laugh. "Of course. He was wonderful. No trouble at all." They spoke briefly, and when the call ended, Claire set the phone down slowly. Ethan watched her, his expression calm, though his eyes held the weight of unspoken questions. "She'll be here soon," Claire said softly. He nodded. Then, after a long pause, he stood, lifting his bag from the hallway. He walked back toward her, standing only a step away now. The closeness sent her heart racing. "I'll never forget last night," he said quietly. "Not because of what we did, because we didn't cross any lines, but because of what I realized." Her voice trembled. "And what's that?" He looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "That sometimes the heart notices things the mind isn't ready to accept. And once you've noticed, you can't go back to pretending it doesn't exist. Her chest ached at his words. She wanted to reach for him, to hold on, to confess that she felt the same storm inside her. But the sound of a car pulling up outside broke the fragile moment. Melissa had arrived. Ethan's eyes lingered on hers one last time. Then he gave a small, gentle smile, the kind that promised he wasn't angry, wasn't impatient, only quietly hopeful. "Goodbye, Claire." She swallowed hard. "Goodbye, Ethan." He turned, opening the door, the morning light flooding in as he stepped outside. Claire stood frozen, her heart racing, her hands trembling. Through the window, she watched him greet his mother, slipping back into the role he had always played. To anyone else, nothing had changed. But inside Claire's home, everything had. She closed the door, leaning against it, her breath shaky. The house felt emptier than before, quieter, yet filled with a memory she knew would never fade. As she sat by the window, watching the sunlight brighten the world, she whispered to herself, some nights change everything, even if no one else ever knows. And though the day had only just begun, Claire understood one truth. The storm might have ended, but its echo would stay with her forever.